was in his office, and he had this modded out 12-inch Picard action figure. He had ripped the sleeves off, and he had put in a sash from a Dark Phoenix action figure he had on it, and then drew in a little beard, and that was his little Mirror Picard he had on his desk. And it's funny because I think I was really influenced by that more than anything, because I did all these other designs, and then I did one last minute. I was like, what should I do? And I ended up doing that, not remembering that I had seen that in his office. I unintentionally plagiarized his mod doll. Hi, I'm J.K. Woodward, Star Trek illustrator for IDW titles like the Mirror Universe, and you're listening to Trek Untold.
Welcome back to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I am your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. Today's guest has an amusing story attached to them, mainly one that embarrasses me. J.K. Woodward is someone I've wanted on this show for a really, really long time, and today I finally got him. Now, if you're not a comic book fan, that name might not mean much to you, but when you see his artwork, I think you're going to be very interested. J.K. is an illustrator who also happens to be a massively huge Trekkie, and is responsible for many of the covers and interior artwork on a ton of Star Trek comics coming to us from IDW. That includes his work on the recent TNG Mirrorverse Saga, crossovers with Doctor Who and Green Lantern, and plenty more. Now, I've been trying to track down J.K. for ages on this show, and I literally traveled to another state to make first contact with him. As it turns out, he's actually a lot easier to find than I made it out to be, and a typo on my end was why I never had prior success in reaching out to him. But hey, better late than never, and today we're taking a trip through JK's artistic journey under a Star Trek lens, looking at his Star Trek work from around 15 years ago to where he is now as a painter. Not only that, we're also getting an exclusive up-close look at how JK paints with a live demo. If you're one of my audio listeners, by the way, you might want to swap out for the video version this week just to see how his work looks when he's doing it. So with all that said, let's get those palettes out and our brushes ready, because today we're talking Star Trek comic art with one of the modern masters, J.K. Woodward. But before we get into this week's episode, I have to ask you, are you following Trek Untold on social media yet? You can find us over on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, all at Trek Untold, one word with no spaces. You can also become a Patreon supporter for this podcast over at patreon.com/TrekUntold. Here you can directly contribute to keeping this show running at full power for as low as a few bucks a month. If you do this, you'll have early access to new episodes, the ability to ask future guests questions, check out exclusive merchandise, and other special benefits. We've also got an official merch store and an Amazon store filled with Star Trek goodies, so if you want to rock a Trek Untold t-shirt to the next con you're going to, or order something Star Trek related for yourself or someone else, please use the links in the show notes to help us help you. Shout out to our show sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions, makers of fine 3D printed Star Trek inspired toys and accessories for collectors of all kinds. But you'll hear more about them later on. Now without further ado, let's beam up this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. So the crazy thing about this interview today that we're doing with Mr. J.K. Woodward across from me on the other side of the screen is that I've been trying to track him down for forever, and I got to finally meet him at a convention in another state far away from where I live. And meanwhile, it turned out that it was the easiest thing possible to contact him on his website. So silly me, but today we are joined today. Finally, I'm very excited to chat with you guys and share this conversation with you with Mr. J.K. Woodward. J.K., how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I am the easiest guy to contact.
I know, that's why it's like so embarrassing, because I kept sending different things, I guess, that were wrong. I don't know what I did. This is a first for me to have that many errors go wrong, and then just like meet a guy at a con and be like, here you go. And then there you are an hour later. So go figure.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got a lot to talk about today because I'm a big fan of your artwork. I know a lot of our listeners today are also big fans of your gorgeous work. But let's just kind of take it from the top here. And JK, I'd love to know What's your earliest memory of Star Trek? It's pretty safe to assume you were a fan growing up, weren't you?
Oh yeah, I used to watch the original series in syndication back in the 70s. And I guess my earliest memory is I think I was like 6 or 7 years old. And I specifically remember finally, after having watched about a year or so, figuring out, oh wait, Spock doesn't have emotions. Like it hadn't occurred to me in my 6-year-old mind, and so that's like my earliest like concrete memory where I remember that episode. I think it was and I can't remember the name of it. It was one of the early ones. I think it might have been what was the transporter accident that split Kirk? The Enemy Within.
Oh yeah, that's real early. Yeah,
Yeah,
season one, yeah.
I think it was that one, and ironically, that's one where Spock shows the most emotions facially. But that was the episode where I remember I was 6 or 7, going, "Oh wait, he's Vulcan. He doesn't have emotions." It didn't occur to me. I was just kind of he was my favorite character because of the ears and the eyebrows at that point, and then he just became more interesting the more I learned about him.
It's funny because by season 3, Spock was like neck deep in emotions because so many episodes are just about screwing with that, like the Medusins, Spock's
Yep.
brain, and just like giving him more ways to emote.
Well, I mean, that was his arc. I mean, through the 3 seasons, he started embracing more and more his human side, or being influenced by a human crew, or a predominantly human crew. And then for the motion picture, I think they felt they had to reset him with the Kolinahr, and then he had another arc where he had to actually die and become more human as time went on. So he has these 2 major arcs, and they all lead to embracing his humanity, each time.
Which is funny because today you see like so many folks complaining about Strange New Worlds, how Spock is talking about all of his emotions, but really that's always been like his main character trait is actually dealing with the emotional balance.
And actually, at the time period that it's in, he was an emotional creature. He wasn't fully embracing his Vulcan side. I mean, if you look at the original pilot, he was smiling and always shouting for no particular reason. No.
He also had like a stubbed foot for no particular reason, but that's a different story altogether.
Yeah.
So let's kind of dig back a little bit further here, get some more background on you, JK. So I'd love to know who were your parents, what did they do, and what did little JK want to be when he grew up?
I was raised mostly by my father. I met my mother a little bit later in life, or it felt like I met her. I obviously knew her, but they had divorced early. My father was worked in a factory, and I think my mother was a country singer.
Oh wow!
So it's
That's
real
a big
I'm
change.
picturing a nice picture of a trailer here, right? Star Trek for me was kind of like I was raised by the TV. And it was in syndication, and it was probably my favorite show. Though the 70s, if you remember, was kind of like a gold mine of science fiction shows, like low budget science. I mean, there was Buck Rogers in 25th Century, I think, like late 70s, early 80s. There was Battlestar Galactica. Star Wars had just come out in cinemas if you had the money for that kind of thing. So science fiction was all over the place, but I think Star Trek was first and foremost my favorite. It was the one show I could rewatch every episode over and over again and not get bored. Whereas, one time's good enough for Buck Rogers. But as far as art goes, I fell in love with comics. And so I would start by copying pages. I was like a John Buscema Spider-Man or a Gil Kane Spider-Man. Spider-Man was my big title, and then before I found the X-Men. And then I just started learning who these artists were and being able to tell the difference between their styles. I picked up a book called How to Draw the Marvel Way. It's kind of a Bible for them. Yeah, it really is a Bible for if you grew up in a certain time and wanted to draw comics. Everybody had to have that book. And that was I think that was John Buscema was the artist that did all the teaching in there. Basically, it should have been called How to Draw the Kirby Way. It was teaching the kind of Kirby school of which was the house style of Marvel at the time. So that was my style until I discovered Bill Sienkiewicz in the 80s, first with Moon Knight, where he was pretty accurately described as Neil Adams on acid. Yeah, but what really kind of caught my attention was Lecter Assassin later on, which was kind of mixed media, airbrush, ripped paper and glue, whatever he had, he seemed to throw onto the page, and it got me interested in what you could really do in comics, and that's what kind of led to painting. Later, he would do a series called Stray Toasters, and the art in that was just incredible and beyond my little teenage brain at the time. But all I knew is that's what I wanted to do, and I started moving more in that direction. And later, I would discover artists like Alex Ross, which my style was probably much more similar to the hyperrealism. But that was sort of my track in art, and it all came from comics. And later, I would discover other forms of art and develop an interest that would sort of feed into what I was doing in comics and my illustration.
It's kind of funny you mention these names because as I was going back and looking through a lot of your older comics, I can like absolutely see Gil Kane influences in there with like the way that you would use darks and lights to create shapes on people. Bill, definitely you got the Bill Sienkiewicz line work. I mean, I can definitely see that when you talk Moon Knight, when you're talking like the Electro Assassin, especially. I can really see that in like your early, some of your very first Star Trek stuff we'll talk about here. So that's really cool because you've had a lot of really, it's quite a mishmash of different types of styles. And you really think about the things that have like heavily influenced you.
Yeah, I'm pretty much known, especially in the last 15 years, for the gouache painting kind of hyperrealism stuff. But I'm constantly telling editors to no effect that I can do other styles, and I would like to do other styles, preferably something that's a little quicker so I can make a little more money. Because it's really time-intensive stuff. I'm always trying to do stuff, and if you look at my Fallen Angel stuff, I did get to play around with different styles in that. Mostly because it was a miniseries. It started out as a miniseries. It became a monthly book, so I had to kind of switch over to something quicker. But because my influences are so sort of diverse and opposite spectrum almost, I've learned to, it's hard to incorporate it. So I've learned to develop like different styles for myself.
So little JK is going through grade school. He's getting better at artwork, all this and that. What does he do then to take this passion and make it into a profession?
Well, actually, that didn't really happen until I was 30. So I was kind of late with it. What happened is I bounced around a lot, moved around a lot. I ran away from home when I was 16, ended up in LA. Did everything from, I worked at a toy store called Hollywood Toy and Costume for the first year, kind of under the table. Ended up in a job with market research. It was called the National Research Group, and we did movie surveys. Really annoying people that would call you in the 90s and ask you if you saw any movies, and then
it's you guys.
spend
Thanks.
an hour on the phone. Yeah. When I got sick of that, and I realized, I would do a lot of had a couple of gallery shows in North Hollywood at the time. I was doing more fine art. I got away from comics for a while. But it was more of a hobby, and I didn't really make any money out of it. And I got kind of worried about where this trajectory was heading, and decided to get like a backup. And then I went to school for, I got an associate's degree, just a quick 2-year thing in computer science, just because the Y2K bug was coming up and there were lots of jobs. That's the reason I did it. I had really no interest, but there were lots of jobs out there that paid better than market research. And so I'm going to do that. Soon as I got out of college, I got a job as a multimedia producer for a company that was doing. I basically lied in the interview and said I knew all the software for animation and they said if I was hired, the first thing they were going to do is send me to a new animation technology exposition, NATE, over in Pasadena. And so my first day on the job, I went to a convention basically, and I went to everything. I was running to every panel, every class, anything I could get, and I was just absorbing all of this. And then I was getting as much free sample software so I could learn this stuff. Nice. And then when I went back after 4 days of that, and I kind of knew enough to fake it, and so I started doing multimedia production, so editing, 3D animation, things like that. So I ended up finding a career in art. Despite and this later led to design, and then later it would lead to Germany, where I was doing some record covers, which led to comics. It was this weird trajectory, but I finally got there when I was 30, and one of the first jobs I did was CSI New York for IDW back in, I think it was 2003 that came out.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned, that you were working on a backup job, essentially having a backup plan. I hear that from like so many people. Like I know I went to art school with folks, and a lot of them, it's like they just start dropping like flies the minute they graduate. Day one, literally, they're all just like, half of them just start working at Walmart, working somewhere else, and they never go back to it. I've heard from so many people who have had difficulties where, you know, they'll do the art school route, or they'll want to be artists, or whatever, but they'll be told by someone else, like, that's not a real job. You have to have a backup plan. And it's just funny because like, here you are, and this is now your real job.
Yeah, I always discourage the backup plan, because really what that does is it can make you complacent. That was me giving up, you know, but somehow found a way back into art, because that's clearly, don't lie to yourself. If that's what you want to do, that's all you're going to do. You're not going to stop till you get there. So all I did was pay a student loan for the next 15 years that I didn't have to pay. You know, if you're really serious about it, you know it, and you'll find a way. You know, everybody does. You know, and if you end up at Walmart, it's because you gave up. You know if that's going to happen. I knew I was going to get a career in art. I just got scared and went for the backup. But if you're going to either get there or die trying.
Comics are a very, very tough field to break into. So, you know, I'm curious for yourself here. I mean, what did you do to make yourself grow and start to stand out more against a very, very competitive field?
I was doing a style that was, again, there are not many people doing painted, photorealistic, and that's kind of what broke me in. That and tenacity. You have to keep coming back. You can't take no for an answer. But I think that's kind of what gave me the edge. It certainly was with IDW. They wanted somebody who could do likenesses, and I demonstrated I could do that. And they needed that for CSI New York. Unfortunately, you know, that now I'm trapped in that style, and it's very, like I said, laborious, time-intensive style. Be careful when you're breaking into comics, because whatever you break in as, you will kind of get stuck there for a while. It's very hard to change style unless you're a huge name, you know. And even they evolve over time; they don't just change. But I think it was the kind of photorealistic, especially with properties like CSI New York, and eventually Star Trek. They kind of like that realism, because then it can feel more like an episode, which is sometimes what you want. Sometimes that's the opposite of what you want in a comic. It just depends on the script. But I had that niche because there was nobody else except for Alex Ross really doing it. And Star Trek can't afford Alex Ross.
Really, nobody can afford Alex Ross. I don't know how Marvel does it every month.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is sponsored by Triple Fiction Productions. Celebrating 15 years in business in 2023, TFP creates 3D printed Star Trek and sci-fi inspired items that fit into any collection. Whether you're a cosplayer who wants a Starfleet phaser, a Bajoran tricorder, or a Klingon dagger, or a toy collector looking for that special accessory or diorama to make your figures truly stand out, Triple Fiction Productions has exactly what you need. And for you figure fanatics, that includes products that are the perfect size for Galoob, Mego, Playmates, and everything in between. All products are 3D printed in the US, with new designs constantly being updated on their website. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, where the more you order, the more discounts you receive. TFP also has a pay what you want section, where clearance or misprinted items are available at a discounted price. Best of all, every product can be shipped worldwide. As a special bonus for listeners of this show, Trek Untold has a special discount code just for you. Enter Untold10 at checkout for 10% off of all orders with no minimum purchase required. That's 10% off using Untold10. To see all of their products, head to triple-fictionproductions.net. Or to stay up to date on their newest products, find them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Triple Fiction Productions, where something is only impossible until it happens.
Have you ever watched a YouTube video and said you wish you could do what they were doing? Whether it's the filming, the production, the editing. Maybe you listen to your favorite podcast and you wondered how they put that show together, how they got that great sound quality, what gear they use, how much does it cost to get started? Or maybe you checked out a video or read a book about one of your favorite entrepreneurs and it made you say, I want to live that life. I want to do what they do. Then check out my podcast, Toys and Tech of the Trade. I'm Rich Butler, and I've been making podcasts for almost 2 decades. This speaking with experts across all fields to get to the bottom of the hows and whys of their achievements. Each week, I sit down with these amazing people who have carved their own path in life and share the gadgets, the gear, and the tech that they rely on to create their content, the methods that they use to run their business, and the habits and trends that are part of their daily routine and their way of life. And all of that, of course, gets put together to make them successful. We pull back the curtain on the process to help you understand what these people do differently so that you can draw inspiration and get ideas and be inspired so that you can take action today. This podcast is inspiring, educational, it's enlightening, and most of all, it's a lot of fun. I want you to join me on this journey so that you can use the tools and advice shared in this podcast to level up your business or creative endeavors, giving you all the tips, tactics, and tools so that you can transform what you're doing from a side hustle into a full-time lifestyle where you can collect a paycheck for doing what you love. Check out Toys and Tech of the Trade wherever you listen to podcasts, and check out the RageWorks Network at RageWorksNetwork.com for more info on this podcast and all of the many other great shows that we have on the RageWorks Podcast Network. That's Toys and Tech of the Trade with some assembly required.
So what would you say then is more important for someone who's like trying to work their way up through the industry? Is it developing a style? Is it working quickly to be able to meet your deadlines? Or is it just having the tenacity to kind of never give up and just keep pushing and getting yourself out there more and more, especially in today's like social media heavy market?
I'm going to have to say yes to all three of those. I think Scott Tipton once told me, you have to be, there are three things you need, and you have to be 2 out of 3 of these. You got to be fast, you got to be good, and you got to be pleasant to work with. Now you can be two out of 3 of these, but you've got to have at least 2 of them, or you won't last long. I think the most, especially we're dealing with periodicals here. Basically, that's what comics are. They got to come out every month. I think being on time is probably the most important. But if nobody's picking up the issue because you suck, so being good, I would put that the second. And being pleasant to work with is important because you are spending the majority of your time working with these people. Maybe you spend, it is a collaborative thing, so you are going to have to deal with these people. And if you're a pain in the editor's ass, you're not going to ask back because their job's hard enough because they're dealing with multiple titles and you can't act like you're the only one. I think that's probably being respectful of an editor's time is the best thing you can do. Not doing that is the biggest mistake you can make.
All right, so JK, let's start going down memory lane here, because I'd really like to talk about your Star Trek art, but using this as a kind of talking point about the evolution of your style. Because as we mentioned, today you're doing this very Alex Ross style, very photorealistic type of thing, but you didn't always start that way. And I want to bring us back to, I think it was your very first Star Trek cover ever, which would have been Star Trek New Frontier #2. Is that correct?
I did Captain's Log, the Pike Captain's Log first.
That was first.
But
okay.
I did the interiors on that one. There was there were one shots called Captain's Log, and there was an alien spotlight I did around the same time. And then I think this was the third cover. If this was the first cover I did, that I was only a cover.
Yeah, it was just the cover art. That's all you did for that one.
It was just a cover, and I didn't do the interiors. The 2 I mentioned before them were covers and interiors. Okay. So this was the first only cover I did. And I know which one you're talking about. Had like the growth on the space dock, like infecting the ship in the space dock. And that was done, very much in traditional style. Pen and ink and digital colors. And that was the style I was using at the time I was working on Fallen Angel. And like I said, it was a monthly thing. So that was a style I was using on those pages. So I was accustomed to it. So when I got the cover, it didn't even occur to me to ask. I just did it in that style. But let me correct you for a second. I did start in photorealistic painting and then switched back. So the early Star Trek stuff will have a more traditional feel to it. And then I switched back. Did you see the Alien Spotlight, the Klingon one?
I did.
4,000 Throats. That's an example of me doing 3 different styles in the same book because they were 3 different stories and 3 different timelines as told through Kang.
Yeah.
So you'll see an almost Bruce Timm style cartoon in the TOS era with painted backgrounds, and then you'll see a kind of watercolor wash kind of painted style, a little bit more impressionistic, and then finally there's a medieval story where I did a like full photorealistic style that I kind of use today. Which so that was kind of a challenge because it was almost I had to switch personalities every 8 pages. So.
Because I noticed by like 2010, because I think that's when you did the Captain's Log books. Like that's when you're now like going to the real fully painted look, whether it was like what you're doing today or just digital style, whatever it was, you can tell me. But I feel like that was the point where you kind of like started to lead into more of that type of work.
Oh, so what? Maybe I had it wrong. So the Captain's Log was in 2010. I thought that was.
So yeah, I believe Captain's Log was 2010, and then Spotlight, and it would have been 2008.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. I was in Long Beach when I did. Okay, I remember things by what city I lived in.
I feel better now. I was like, oh god, I did my homework.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, that was that cover was like around 2008, right, or 2007. Yeah. Okay. No, yeah, damn. For some reason, I thought.
I mean, listen, you made a lot of stuff here, so I mean, it's kind of understandable.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe I remember anything. To be honest, that isn't like over a year old.
Can you remember how it felt to actually get a Star Trek gig? Because that must have been just like mind-boggling to you at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when they got the license, I was in the middle of Fallen Angel, and I loved being on that book. Working with Peter David was great. I mean, that was my second job ever. I'd only worked with 2 writers, and one was Max Allan Collins, and one was Peter David. So I was like, I'm doing great,
Pretty good.
I don't want to, but at the same time, I'm like, everybody else is doing Star Trek but me, because I'm stuck on a series. And so, yeah, basically, I think the editor with Fallen Angel, and I'm so sorry I can't remember his name at the moment. At that time, though, he was the editor of both, and I begged him to get me involved somehow. And he was worried about, me not making my deadlines if he gave me too much. And I promised him that wouldn't happen. Just give me a cover. So he tested me out with that. And then I think I did like an 8 pages or something. And then I finally, when Fallen Angel got canceled, I went right straight to Star Trek.
So by this point in 2010, we're still talking here, but I kind of want to look at this as an overall piece of how you work now today as well. I'm curious about photo reference. How much photo reference do you use versus observation in life versus just making it up in your head? And keeping in mind here that you're working with established licensed characters who have a likeness for the most part. You've got like some freedom with certain characters, but we're talking here 2010, for example, you've got to have Jeffrey Hunter's face. You've got to have the actor who portrayed Jellicoe. Can't remember his name, but you're dealing with actual likenesses. So I imagine there's got to be some kind of balance here. So talk to me about like how you're actually literally shaping these characters.
I've learned to draw from life. So I figure drawing and stuff. I'll sometimes do photos of myself and then look at that just to get the lighting right. With faces, though, always using photo reference for that to get likenesses. Always going to back to the show. Always looking not just at what the actor looks like, but what the actor does for that character. Because you don't want to paint William Shatner, you want to paint Captain Kirk, and there is a subtle, there is nuances there. There is a difference. Certainly, with like a good example is the difference between Leonard Nimoy and Spock. They look like 2 different people. Spock doesn't smile. So I always go right to the reference material when I'm working on something. In fact, I will stop and do like screen freezes and just draw right from the screen sometimes. So you want to get what the actors do. You don't want to reinvent. I'm not going to do a better Captain Kirk than William Shatner. Let's put it that way. So I'm definitely going to use references, and I definitely want to get those likenesses right. Now, when it comes to anything else, the sets, a lot of times I don't need reference. I know what the bridge looks like in full detail, especially the original series and Next Generation. And of course, it's a lot of fun when I get to invent my own ships or alien species, which sometimes occurs. Of course, I don't need any reference for that because there's no wrong answer. It's all, what I come up with. But definitely with always reference with likenesses.
So let's go into one of the nerdiest things I think that's on your resume, and it's a pretty amazing one because you got to do the Doctor Who Star Trek Next Generation crossover.
Yeah.
Which was a simulation. I feel like this was like the real development of where we're seeing you today. I feel like this was, at this point now, a lot more confident, a lot thicker painting. Like, I feel like especially the Captain's Log, you were still like not quite sure what you wanted to do with it maybe. But it feels like at this point now, like you understood what you want to do. You understood the medium a lot better. I mean, I feel like there's a big jump between what we saw then what we're seeing here. So talk to me about what you did for this one that was a little bit different for you. And also just how cool is it that you get to historically do a Doctor Who and a Star Trek crossover? I mean, that's just got to be like the most amazing thing for you.
Well, it was a game changer. And in fact, I thought it was a joke. I was speaking, I think I was speaking to Denton, who was the editor on there, and Chris Rael, who was the editor-in-chief at the time. And I would always call up and go, what do you got? What do you got? I want more Star Trek, you know. And they said, well, how would you feel about Star Trek Doctor Who? And I was like, all right, if you're not going to take this seriously, you know. I thought it was a joke. I thought they were messing with me because they would do that sometimes. You know, when I found out it was real, I knew I had to do something more. What I had been searching for was a painted style that would bring some kind of realism to it, but would be time efficient. You know, something I could do realistically. I didn't want to spend 20 hours on a page, you know, if I could help it, because that would mean 100-hour work weeks to get the thing done in time. When it came to this, I had to take this a lot seriously. I knew it was a game changer. I knew I had to work a lot harder on this. And so I did it. I put in the time. And it was more than any other book I'd ever done, including Fallen Angel. It was a bigger seller. I mean, the way I could tell is, and I still have the poster hanging in my kitchen. I had done a signing for, I think it was at Midtown, because I lived in New York at the time. And yeah, there was a line out the door. That had never happened before. I had always been the guy sitting there where you come into the comic book store and you see a guy sitting all by himself at the table, waiting to sign something, and nobody's there. And you kind of feel bad for him. And you go, who's that guy? That's who I usually was. And now I had this big line, and I knew it was, you know, that was just when issue 1 came out. And I was still, I think at the time, working on issue 5. And I was like, yeah, I got to take this real serious. So it was definitely a game changer. And it was probably, of this style of art, of this photorealism, probably some of the worst I've ever done, because I was still kind of a newbie at it. I'd like to think it's gotten a lot better since then, but this is where I told myself there is no sacrifice I'm not willing to make this work. And it was almost a year of my life, 7 days a week, nothing else going on. The second you wake up to the second you go to sleep, that's all you're doing. And that's, I mean, it was worth it. Let's put it that way.
I mean, looking back on it now, what do you wish you could have done differently on it?
Well, one of the things I did, and I don't want to jump ahead, but City on the Edge of Forever, I kind of, it was another thing where I had to up my game, and I started working on larger size. And I started spending more money on brushes, sable hair, and better paint. And I asked for more time. I said, can we get a lead on this so I can spend 6 weeks on an issue instead of trying to do it in 4 or 5? I wish I could have done that with Star Trek Doctor Who. The art, if you look at the difference between City on the Edge of Forever and the art in Star Trek Doctor Who, I think even somebody with a novice eye can see the difference. So I wish I could have gone back and had a little more time, spent a little more money on it.
Now, also in crossover land, you know, this is around the same time period where I think we're getting like Star Trek meets Planet of the Apes and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah,
and roughly same time period, I say, within, you know, a few years.
And that was also the Tiptons that wrote that same writing team that did Star Trek Doctor Who.
Yep, Scott and Dave Tipton, who we've had on this show before. They're awesome guests. And you guys also did, I don't remember if this was with the Tiptons or not, but I know you illustrated this. You did the Green Lantern Star Trek crossover, and this was actually Abrams verse Star Trek. So that is extra unusual. I'm trying to like wrap my head around it still, even though I've read this thing. I'm just like, okay, of all the things to cross over with, not even just Green Lantern and Star Trek, but Abrams Star Trek and Green Lantern. Right. So there's got to be a story attached to this somehow. I mean, tell me about this one here.
Well, I think the writer on that was Mike Johnson, if I remember.
Okay.
Right. And I was it Tony? No, it was Angel. I'm not sure who the artist was. I'm sorry. I should just keep my mouth shut if I don't know.
I can edit that. I want to just start the sentence again.
All right, so I believe it was Mike Johnson that wrote that. You were asking, it wasn't the Tiptons on that one. And that was something I really wanted a DC credit, and I knew I didn't get the job. I'm not doing the job because I was doing something else at the time, so I wouldn't be able to do any pages. So I begged for covers, and I got 2 covers on that. And the first cover I did, I just wanted to encompass the whole thing in the hopes that they would use it on the collected trade paperback or something. So I wanted to, it was called Spectrum Wars, I think. So I got the two major crossover villains. I tried to include everything. It basically did a Drew Struzan style kind of painting of as much as I could get in there. And I don't think they ended up using it for the trade paperbacks, so that it didn't work. All I ended up doing was spending an extra 30 hours on a cover that but it was exciting because I wanted a DC credit. Now I had one, but it was really hush hush. And the other reason I really wanted to work on it is I wanted to find out what it was about before it came out. And that's the way, that's the way you find out. You got to sign NDAs and you got to keep your mouth shut. But it's fun to, I had a million questions I wanted answered, and the best way to do it was to get a cover.
Hey everybody, we'll get right back to the interview in 1 second, but I wanted to remind you all to check out Trek Untold over at Patreon. Patreon is the best way to directly support creators of things you like through a monthly subscription of an amount that you can choose. Trek Untold has a few different tiers already with different benefits, ranging from early access to episodes, the ability to ask a future guest questions, exclusive merchandise, and other bonuses that I'd love to offer, but first I need to grow that Patreon community to do that. Trek Untold has been around since mid-2020 and has grown a ton since then, thanks to listeners and viewers like you. Through a platform like Patreon, you can help me keep improving the quality of each episode and keep bringing you new interviews with folks that make the Star Trek universe what it is. If this community can grow more over on Patreon, I can offer new perks like watch parties, exclusive Trek Untold episodes, being able to directly interact with guests, and other things, but in order to do that, I need to know my audience wants these things. The best way to tell me what you want is by supporting us on Patreon, so please, check us out at patreon.com/TrekUntold today and become a bigger part of the Trek Untold family. And now, back to the interview. Now, at this point in your career, too, you've now done covers, you've done a lot more interiors, you've done a lot of painted interiors like we've talked about here. So from, let's say, day one, working on Fallen Angels, starting working to Star Trek, all the way to where we are now, and you had just mentioned Drew Struzan style covers as an inspiration. How you felt that your style was changing from that point? I mean, to do something like a Drew Struzan cover, the composition is very different from what you were doing, 5 years earlier, right? So how did you see yourself coming along? Where were you going, and what were you planning on trying to do at this point with your art?
I think out of necessity, the longer you do this, the more chances you take because you don't want to repeat yourself. When I first started doing Star Trek covers, I did the typical Star Trek movie poster, couple of floating heads, and get the Enterprise in there somewhere or a ship in there. And then that gets old really quick. So then I start doing kind of a Struzan composition. I think it was not until Mirror Broken where I wanted to do more of those kind of Bronze Age comic action covers. I mean, if I could get away with that, I put dialogue balloons on the covers, like they did in the good old days. And I kind of embrace that. I kind of think that's still where I am, though I do get directed into doing more Struzan style stuff a lot. But I like the action cover. It's more of a challenge. It's a lot more fun. And as far as anything else, I think it's just everything else that's changed over the years has been kind of nuanced stuff. I do a lot more with lighting. I do a lot more with, so if we were in television or movie industry, we call them gels. I do a lot more with gels, like warm lighting, cold lighting. Basically, a gel is a color screen you put on your lights, or cellophane you put on the light to colorize the lighting. So I like to do like a warm rim light behind the character, so you get like that kind of yellow edge that makes it pop out, and then cold lighting on the shadow side. And it's sort of that cyan orange cliche they use in movies, but I'm having a lot more fun with color than I used to. Because in fact, what I used to do was at the beginning, I would paint in black and white and then digitally colorize it in the way that they colorize movies, which is basically a color layer in Photoshop that picks up the gray tones as that color. But that got pretty static and that got pretty boring. And I'm glad I'm actually spending the money on different tubes of gouache and actually adding color in the initial stages rather than digital.
Well, let's jump into your magnum opus, at least for the time being, and that would be the TNG Mirrorverse series, which starts in Mirror Broken, and then I believe, if I'm getting this right, it's like Through the Mirror and then Mirror War. And I gotta tell you, as a fan, like I'm in love with this series. It's just so much fun to read it. Amazing writing as well. But seeing all these
Yeah.
characters in their mirror form is just the coolest thing ever.
Oh,
So
and it,
it absolutely is. I mean, it's got to be fun for you, right? So talk to me about that first things first and foremost, because you're literally doing TNG Mirrorverse characters. They didn't do that in the show, so you got to like really figure out the whole look and the feel of these guys. So I
yeah.
guess the best way of trying to figure out how to start this is how much freedom did you have to do this? And was Paramount in your ear saying, no, you can't do this, can't do that? Or was it kind of just like up to you to figure out the looks of all these characters?
It was up to me, but it was a collaboration. Well, let me first say Paramount wasn't involved at the time because CBS. It was before Viacom merged
Okay,
back
yeah.
together, so there was no Paramount was its own and CBS was its own, and CBS had the TV and consumer product rights, and Paramount only had the movie rights. So I was working directly with CBS, and it started as a style guide. They were doing a style guide for Mirror Universe products. I didn't realize at the time, but I suspect it was in anticipation of the Mirror Universe stuff they were going to be doing in Discovery 2 years later. This was pre-Discovery. And there was a big gaping hole in Next Generation as far as Mirror Universe. Now, there were novels and there had been some comics, and nothing was consistent. So they wanted to, let's just start from scratch. Let's come up with what the Mirror Universe looks like. So I was working with designers, and I can't remember the design house. I'll get that information. We can pop it in later, or you can put it in the show notes or something. But I was working with CBS Consumer Products directly and this design house, and they came up with the symbol that they used, which was a variation on the dagger through the planet that we saw in the original series. And I came up with the look of the characters, and I had done so many of them. But I remember when I had the first meeting with John Van Sitters, and I was in his office, and he had this modded out 12-inch Picard action figure, like kind of like a Mego figure, but it wasn't Mego. I don't remember the company, but he had ripped the sleeves off, and he had put in a sash from a Dark Phoenix action figure he had on it, and then drew in a little beard, and he, that was his little Mirror Picard he had on his desk. And it's funny because I think I was really influenced by that more than anything, because I did all these other designs, and then I did one last minute. I was like, what should I do? And I ended up doing that, not remembering that I had seen that in his office. I unintentionally plagiarized his mod doll, and that ended up being the ones we used. It was overwhelmingly more popular with everybody, and I'm glad it happened, because one of the things I'd like to do is I'm a comic fan and a Star Trek fan, but that isn't really, or never used to be, that common. Star Trek comics didn't get the kind of respect they deserve from the comic community, and comics wasn't an interest with most Star Trek fans. Some, but not all. So I wanted to get more Star Trek fans into comics and more comic fans into Star Trek. And I thought, if I make them look like superheroes, so I gave them all, I buffed them all out, and it made sense to me that they would look that way in the Mirror Universe, because why wouldn't you lift? Why wouldn't you want to be as strong as you possibly could in a world where, you're going to have to fight every day? So we put a gym on the Enterprise, and Picard does bench presses now. It's like he did in issue 2. But yeah, that's kind of the story about that. I also had a few things I did. Like I felt like the engineering crew would have to have extra layer of protection to work down there. So I gave engineering leather jackets. We also had like a 3/4 leather jacket for the dress uniform. So, and I was kind of going for the Nazi look, the pirate look and the Nazi look. That's the Mirror Universe. So I figured the leather 3/4, the high boots, that's a dress uniform. They kind of looked like Nazis. But generally, what you would see, the regular uniform you'd see every day, is sleeveless for everybody. And I didn't just make the men buff. I mean, the women were kind of, like Tasha Yar kind of built like Ronda Rousey, so they were all they all went to the gym. But it was something for me. It was kind of exciting to see the characters in that way. And it was something that you also could never do on TV.
No.
This is something you can only do in comics, and it made it kind of exciting to work on.
I'm just so curious now, like thinking about this, like what would the mirror version of the cetacean ops department look like? Like what are those dolphins going to look like?
Well, they'd be sharks, wouldn't they?
There you go. Oh, okay, that's brilliant. Sold.
And that's when you're done in the agonizer booth, that's where they throw you.
So again, you are a giant Star Trek fan, and so are Scott and Dave Tipton. They wrote the Mirrorverse stuff with you, rather on their own. But yeah, actually, I'm curious. Like, this is looking at how you work as a whole. You got the Tiptons. You are as part of this project. You guys are all massive, massive fans and know this franchise in and out. So when it comes to like writing and drawing, how do you guys, if at all, collaborate on this project? Is it kind of that they do their thing, you come in and just do yours? How does that work?
Well, it wasn't always this way, but it became this way by the Mirror Universe, certainly. It started with they'd ask me for a wish list, what I would love to see, and they'd see if it fit, if they could do it. And then it turned into we would have these meetings, much like we're doing right now. We'd usually Zoom or Skype or something, or on the phone, and we just brainstorm and just kind of loose plot, and then Dave and Scott would kind of tighten it up in an outline, and we'd have a second meeting and talk about that. And then they would do the script from that. But basically, it was just chaos. We'd have a quick chaotic call, like, well, what about this? No, that won't work because of this. Or this is one of those conversations that we all have with each other for free anyways. What if? Nerd conversations, yeah, and then they work from that, and they would tighten it up, and then I would just get the script and draw it, once that was done. But we also did that with Mirror Wars. Originally, I was going to draw that, and I couldn't take the job at the time, last minute. So that kind of, I regret that. But yeah, we had a meeting with that, and I think there was going to be a sequel to that because we were talking about that, and we scheduled another meeting, and I don't think that ever happened. But that's kind of how it goes. We just kind of have fun with it, and then it's up to Dave and Scott to make all these crazy ideas work.
And one of the things that I really love about this whole mirror universe that you guys are doing with the TNG world is that, you've got all these other tertiary characters who've now also made appearances, and there's all sorts of like little things where if and it's like, that's cool to see that happen. But I'm curious, if anything has been left, normally I'd say on the cutting room floor from talking to like an actor or somebody, but in your case, were there any things that got thrown out to the trash bin, maybe like any characters or any ideas that you wanted to do, tried it, and it just didn't work out?
I can't think of any characters I wanted to bring in. There was a concept I wanted to do, and I kept bringing up about Data. I wanted a story to talk about why Data is the way he is in the Mirror Universe, and I wanted to kind of push the idea that he's still trying to be human, but this is the lesson of humanity he learned. You have to be a good weapon. And because of that, he seems less human because he's incorporating board parts, but it's really his attempt to try to be human or be the best human he could be. That kind of came across, especially in the origin they wrote, but I really wanted like a piece of dialogue to come out and say it. And I guess they felt that would just be too on the nose, and they're probably right. And there was another concept I really wanted for the Mirror Universe about Emperor Spock. And that was he wasn't deposed because of weakness, as was told by Kira in the DS9 episode, nor was the Empire as weak as she made it sound. Everybody was like, oh, Deep Space Nine says they were destroyed. Yeah, of course they're going to tell the prisoners of war that. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. Now, yeah, they were defeated, they were beaten, they weren't in great shape, but it doesn't mean they were totally destroyed. So I wanted the concept of Emperor Spock being defeated, not because necessarily he was a reformist, but because somebody ambitious came along and convinced everybody that all these things he was doing was weakening the Empire, and that this person was going to make the Empire great again. and kind of Spock became the scapegoat of that, and this new emperor was fighting too many wars on too many fronts because he wanted to rule with an iron fist, and people were pulling out of this new federation, and then they had to be reconquered to be brought back in the Empire, and that's what weakened it. that there was an unwise emperor that came in and screwed it up, and it wasn't reform that did it, because that never really sat well with me, that reform makes you weak. The reform is never bad for a nation, so it wouldn't be bad for an empire. And I wanted that story, but there just wasn't room for it, I guess. There's too many other things that we were telling, but I was kind of hoping that would get in there, and who knows, maybe it will one day.
Spoilers.
Yeah, now that you all know it.
Now that I've ruined it for everybody. But I want to talk a little bit more now about some of the work that you do, because as we mentioned earlier in this interview, good portion of what you're doing is working with actual likenesses. And I love what you do with all the TNG crew. Like I've already said, I could gush about that for an hour alone and not ask you a single question. And I'm trying not to. But, there's a lot of folks out there who I think are maybe easier to draw than others. Some that are more problematic. I mean, I feel like Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner, for example, are probably two like fairly difficult people to draw, because from a profile, they're super easy. But I feel like from a 3/4 or a front, because of the way their noses are and the way their faces are shaped, like you kind of lose a lot of stuff and flattens them out a lot. This is all kind of some technical stuff, I guess. But as far as like likenesses go, who's your favorite to draw? Who's your least favorite to draw? And who's just flat out the hardest to draw that you had to deal with?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Brent Spiner and Patrick Stewart, because their likenesses for me are the easiest, because they have standout features that I can grab onto and go like, that's uniquely them. I have the most problem with Jonathan Frakes, because he pretty much has the perfect Caucasian male face. It's like I'm looking for like a flaw, or like, if he had a big nose or something, and the only thing you can really latch onto with him is he has sort of smiling eyes sometimes, but a serious brow. And it's this weird combination. If you're not an artist, you maybe don't even notice that. But there's kind of this weird dichotomy. And if you get the eyes right, everything else works out. But he's like I said, with and with Data too, makeup helps. You get those yellow eyes. Okay. Kind of didn't look like him, but that helps. There's nothing really to help you with Commander Riker.
So Jonathan Frakes is just literally the Vitruvian Man.
Yeah. But Worf is fun too. Like anything with prosthetics is fun, obviously. Because painting ridges is fun.
I feel like stuff like that really would help you, because it's kind of like more reference points to figure out where a face goes, where things go, that sort of thing.
And details like that, the standout, breakout kind of details like that help with the likeness. Like if my Michael Dorn's a little weak, the ridges will do the rest of the work for me. Whereas Jonathan Frakes, you got to get perfect every time.
So how about the ladies of Star Trek, though? I mean, do you have any difficulties with any of them?
No, not at all. I don't know why. I mean, I like I really enjoy painting Dr. Crusher. She's got very angular features, which is fun to paint, and it's makes the lighting a little easier, so I can just focus more on other things. And I'll say this: Deanna Troi was a fun character in the Mirror universe, because I just never stopped with the hair. Her hair was different length every panel. I didn't care. I just like if this panel, if the wind's blowing, her hair will go right into the next panel, 30 feet away. I had a lot of fun with that character, and I got to do different outfits every issue, but they were always as exotic as I could get. Midriff exposed often, because Mirror Universe. Yeah, I never had a problem. My only problem with TNG is there's only 2 female characters after, because even in the Mirror Universe, Yar had to go.
A while back in this show, I also had another artist named Kavita Maharaj, who does these really wonderful gouache paintings of Star Trek things. And I asked her about painting starships, and I was like thinking that they must be the hardest, most arduous thing to do. And she kind of talked to me about how it kind of became like almost a meditation for her to sit through and do starships. So I'm curious for you and how you paint, with especially a very organic style. How's it been tackling starships?
Well, okay. One thing I appreciate with starships is there's always a singular light source, because you're in space. The assumption is you're near a star, because we have to light the thing. I don't like painting Generally in Star Trek, you're in orbit if you're seeing the ship. If you're not, you're in warp, and that has its own little physics to it. One thing that makes it really hard is if you're in deep space and there is no stars nearby, it has to be lit by all those little lights. And that is a lot of gradient work, and that makes it very difficult for me, especially since I pencil all the detail. I go over your first coat of paint, and then you go back and you do those small details. And sometimes you lose the pencils when you do that, and it's almost like you're penciling it twice. The other thing is you've got to have a steady hand when you're doing the detail work especially on Enterprise D, where it's all these little squares everywhere. That gets tiring after a while because there's a lot of repetition. So in other words, you have these squares and you're just doing these little highlights. So you're just doing these little yellow L's along the edge to show the light hitting that side of the square. You do that about 3 times and you're done, but you got about 20 more to do after that. And that kind of thing wears on me. It's, to me, that the detail is boring. I like to kind of just, that, because that's when the creative process is over and you're just doing the monotonous work. I don't like painting ships, to be honest. I don't enjoy it. I much more enjoy painting people.
I mean, it's understandable because ships are, I mean, quite honestly, they have their own set of anatomy, really, if you think about it. I mean, they got their own special foreshortening and perspective you had to figure out. And starships like the Enterprise D, especially, or I feel like even the E, like they're kind of wacky how they're shaped.
Yeah. And then perspective on a saucer is always tricky. But also it's, with me, it's just all that texture that, you got to get on the Enterprise D is the part that gets a little monotonous. I feel like if you're a digital artist, not a big deal because you can cut and paste and there's shortcuts you can take. But if you have to actually go hand paint all that stuff, it gets old. It's kind of like the equivalent of people that draw superhero comics that have to do it in New York and have to draw all those windows.
Oh yeah,
on a skyscraper behind you. I mean, I look at that and go, oh God, that's worse than the Enterprise.
All right, so JK, we talked a lot today about your art, your evolution, that kind of thing, but I would love to see it in action. Can we get a little bit of a demo today?
Absolutely. I happen to be working on a commission that's Star Trek related right now. I think it would be the perfect thing to do.
Awesome. Right. Well, let's beam up our camera angles to a different perspective and let's watch JK work.
Sweet.
You say that now. I haven't answered any questions yet. All right. So, JK, I see we got here and in progress what appears to be a Quark and a Garrick. Is that right?
That's correct. This is the second time I've done a commission of this scene. But if you remember, it's the root beer scene.
Yes.
The insidious root beer.
So sweet, so cloying.
Just like the Federation.
Exactly. So about how long would you say you are into this piece now? Let's say how many hours and at what phase would you call yourself here with this?
Okay, so this is the final phase. What I do is I do the flesh tones first, and that's mainly to get the likenesses out of the way. Then what I do is I go in and you can see the color palettes that I'm using. Right now, I just did the cool palette. So that's it's this guy, that's your blacks, your blues, your white for the metallic. The reason it's good that I have this piece here is it'll show you what I was talking about when I was talking about color choices. One thing I noticed about Deep Space Nine, about the set, and it's something I like to exaggerate because I like to keep the backgrounds as simple as possible, is it's always this dichotomy and this almost clash between the warmth of the Bajoran earth tones and oranges and reds and yellows in the background over the cold Cardassian steel, the desaturated grays that is the station. So what I'm going to do here is we have this beam that I've already put kind of the cold colors on for the foreground, but the background, I'm going to have that kind of warm colors coming through. So I'm going to paint it kind of monochromatic in reds and yellows.
So this is essentially making like an underpainting.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do right now is this background and just show you how that kind of clash works.
So how important is this underpainting for kind of like setting the tone or the temperature of your work? Is this like something you do on all your pieces?
Yeah, it's actually very important because it kind of gives it's kind of what gives it its personality, the painting. More so more important to me than getting everything just perfect as far as detail is getting the tone. It's going to need to feel like you're watching DS9. And again, because I want the focus to be on these characters, and I can't really get a Gaussian blur on the background. What I want to do is simplify the background, and the way I do that is with color. So there'll be very little over this underpainting when it's done. It's just I just want the warmth to come through. Do this highlight here. And like I said, this is almost a movie cliche, the cyan and orange. But it's that way because it works, and I like using it a lot. And it's very common in DS9.
Now, as you're doing that, I'm also looking at your pencils, and I'm seeing like a good amount of rendering in your pencils. How polished are your pencils before you go painting? I mean, do you like to keep things very tight? Do you like to have that information in front of you as you're painting, or do you keep things more loose typically?
Both. It depends on what we're talking about. With the faces, I come in with a lot of detail, and I even do a lot of shading. But because the graphite, the oils in the graphite can push the paint off the paper, I go back later with one of these. This is like kneaded rubber eraser, and kind of roll over it to take some of that off. But I go pretty tight with the pencils for the likenesses. I go a little looser here. As you can see, these are just lines.
Right.
But I know exactly what I'm going to do with that. So it requires much less. A lot of times with textures, a lot of that is done with the brush. And so putting that kind of detail in pencil would just be a waste of time.
I just got the chance to visit a sort of auction house recently that does comic book art. And I was looking at a lot of their originals. And like one of my favorite things about seeing original comic book art, especially when it's black and white, is seeing where people used masking fluid, where people used whiteout, things like that. So for the way you work at this phase, I mean, are there any kind of tricks that you do like that? Like, are you going to use masking fluid with keeping your whites as white as possible? Are you doing anything like that to kind of like, not necessarily cheat, but things like that kind of make your life a little bit easier?
Sometimes I will go over with white acrylic for highlights, but generally my white is just simply avoid it with the brush.
So you're just using the white of the paper, basically.
Yeah. And that doesn't always go smoothly because sometimes I'll get like a lot of paint on this part of my hand while I'm working, and sometimes mistakes happen. But generally, I try to just let the paper be the white. Again, though, like if I may go over Quark's cheekbones here with some white acrylic just to have a little bit of a highlight. But I make those decisions at the very end. I take a look at what I got and then and decide. But the absence of paint is the white so far.
Okay. Now, when you do like sketches for things like commissions or even your pieces for IDW, are you doing like any studies or sketches with color beforehand, or you kind of just go into it, you have an idea of what you want to do, and then that's how you work?
Yeah, no, well, first off, I do pencil sketches for the approval process through CDS. Anyways, when I'm doing work for IDW for any cover or anything, and I usually actually do those. They're not pencil sketches. I do them in ink. I do ink wash, so they'll get the idea of the tone. I found out that the pencil sketches aren't enough always for them to understand a simple idea how great it will look once I get the tone in there, the shadowing. So I started doing them in ink, and then from there I take that, I scan it in, and I put digital color on it to try to figure out what I want to do. So yeah, that's pretty much the color study I do, and that's just for me. They approve it based on the sketch. They don't really have that many notes about color until the project is done, and usually it's either approved or not.
So while you're doing this demo right now, you've got my voice here to distract you. But when you're working on your own, are you listening to music? Do you have TV on? Do you work in silence? Like, is there a method to your madness?
I almost always have something on so I don't lose my mind. Because I'll be hyper focused from about 6 a.m. till about 10 at night on this work, and you go pretty batty after a while. So usually podcasts, mostly when I run out. I'll usually have audiobooks, and barring that, music. The problem with music is music makes me want to get out of the studio and do something. It's it's whereas something like an audiobook, I'll like hyper focus on that, and it'll kind of distract me.
Well, it sounds like you need to listen to more episodes of Trek Untold, if you ask me.
Yeah, I guess I will now. They're not all Trek podcasts because I listen to a lot of stuff, but I'm killing like 16 hours a day, so I have a lot of podcasts I listen to.
On average, about how long would you say it takes to finish a piece hour-wise? And how many hours would you say you put into this one so far? And how many more do you think you'll need to actually wrap it up?
I'm looking at about 4 or 5 more hours, and I think I've put about 10 to 12 in. So I would, they usually come in on between 15 to 20 hours.
So then, like, typically, you'd say like then a finished page for IDW would be like a 2-day job for one page.
Yeah, well, a day and a half. I work long hours, but yeah, I I try to get 4 pages done in a week. So yeah, what that means basically is about 100-hour work week. Because they generally take 20 or more. Something like this, a commission like this, or a cover or a splash page tends to go a little faster than page art because there's a lot more to consider when you're doing page art, and you're technically doing like 6 to 8 smaller pictures, smaller scenes. So there's considerably more work to that.
Now, right now we're watching you make some lines, which are looking pretty straight in all honesty. So, I mean, is that like a skill you've learned over time, is how to do straight lines without rulers?
Yep.
So,
I only do it horizontal, so you'll see me turn this thing. I can't do it vertically. I don't know if any artist, if it's natural to do it, horizontally. If every artist is like that, I never asked, but I have a feeling that most people tend to turn it horizontally for this kind of straight line.
I mean, I feel like a lot of folks who might still like be learning the early stages of painting, that kind of thing, they don't realize that you actually can rotate the canvas yourself to have that kind of freedom, right?
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. The only I do a lot of time-lapse photography on my social media, especially on Instagram, of work I do, and the only thing that's I have to focus on, like something like the face or something where I don't have to spin it so much, because if you're doing that time-lapse stuff, spinning it's no good. You'll get whiplash.
So you're working primarily in gouache when you do this. So why not acrylic or why not watercolor, which moves similarly, even though it's not as thick? But why gouache? Is that just kind of like to follow in Alex Ross's footsteps, or because you find that it's the best thing for you to get the job done with?
It gives me more options. Like I said, sometimes I'll mix in some acrylic or some watercolor, depending on what I'm doing. But gouache, you can add water and it can work like a watercolor, or it can be opaque like an acrylic, and you can blend. It also reactivates. So once it's dry, you can come over it with a wet brush and reactivate that paint, do some blends. So in a sense, it's like the best of oil, the best of acrylic, and the best of watercolor in one. It's just really hard to learn how to use. That's probably the only downfall. And the price.
As far as like brushes go, I know a lot of artists tend to have like 1 or 2 brushes that they favor more than others. So for you, I mean, are there any brushes that, I mean, let's put it this way. What are like the 3 most common brushes you're using on a single piece?
I use almost exclusively round brushes, and I use a 6, 4, and a 2. Generally, I use other brushes, but those are the most common ones. This one right now is a 6. It's one of the fatter ones I use. And I've found a mix of synthetic and real sable hair brushes tend to survive the longest, which is important, because the fully artificial hair brushes, they take a beating and they don't come back. What you want with a round brush is you get these beautiful, I don't know if you can see it here, but get these beautiful little points on them, no matter how thick the brush is. So you can do detail work, and then you can use the side of the brush and do some broad strokes as well. It's a time saver to not have to switch a brush. It's a small thing. It's nice to be able to have as versatile a brush as possible. But the only way it's versatile is if it keeps that point and it doesn't fray. and the synthetic stuff tends to get beat up and fray a lot quicker.
Earlier, I asked you about like things. I don't want to say the word cheat, but like things to make your time easier. But I kind of go a little bit more on that. I mean, I know that especially when you're using a medium that is water-based, like gouache, it does allow you some freedom to use things. Like I remember the first day I learned about using salt to like help me make snowflakes. So for the way that you paint, I mean, are you doing anything like that? Do you have any shortcuts that you can implement to do things that maybe like the average person wouldn't even realize that you're doing something differently with?
One of my favorite shortcuts that come in handy a lot with Star Trek is maybe I'll do a demo of that. Maybe that'll be more interesting. You want to see a nebula?
Oh, that'd be fun.
I'll show you my little shortcut for making nebulas, and it's in the background of almost every cover because it's Star Trek.
Yeah, so you definitely are a pro by now doing those.
Yeah, but it's a lot of fun because you'll see they pretty much paint themselves.
If you want to give us the Bob Ross so we can follow along, you can tell us what paints we're using today.
We're using a Winsor and Newton jet black. I believe that's the warm. I forget which one's the warm and which one's the cold. But there's different blacks. There's warm black and cold black. And basically that means when you mix it with something, if one mixes better with blue and one mixes better with like warm colors like red. And when you add white, one will have a brown gray texture and one will have a blue gray texture. I believe what I'm using is the cold, but we'll find out when I mix. So anyways, what I do is I lay down some black. It's the same tape markings I have on my desk for my Whatnot show.
And we should plug that too, by the way, because you're doing Whatnot shows, right? So are you making pieces for folks to buy online?
Yeah. So I'll do a piece live like I am now, and then we auction it at the end of the show. And I also have some Star Trek sketches stuff I auction off, like those ink sketches I told you about for approvals. I often auction those off. Just small stuff though, and whenever I get my comps, B covers or any of the covers I do, I'll sign, remark, and auction those. And I have a store, but basically it's a live art show where if you'd like, you can buy things.
And how do folks find you on Whatnot?
I have a show called JK's Saturday Night Social. If you follow me on any social media, the day before and the day of, I'm heavily promoting it with a link. But if you go to Whatnot and just look that up, it's always Saturday night around 7, sometimes 8. And I started doing, like, sometimes I want to do 2 pieces and I'll start the second one, but it'll get late and I don't feel like finishing it because it's like midnight. So I'll have what I call the Sunday hangover show. And that's where I'll come back on Sunday around 7 and do a second show that weekend. But they're always on weekends.
I've been putting off getting a Whatnot account just because of things like this, but now you're kind of convincing me otherwise. So I think I should probably thank you, but also like say screw you at the same time. I don't quite know here what to do. It's dangerous now. This is a very dangerous way to spend my Saturday nights.
I think, and I probably shouldn't say it, but I think I know, some people can watch if you go to the link without being a Whatnot member. So you won't be tempted to buy anything. So if you just want to watch the painting, I think you can do that.
Yeah, but good luck not being tempted. Come on.
Yeah.
All right, so right now it looks like you're kind of like softening up the sides of this, right? So we have this like big black sort of hole, and is that what's going on here?
Well, I'm just getting more water on this because wait till you see. So I'll clean it up later. This tube of black is a bad batch. It's so gummy.
Bad batch is Star Wars. We don't talk about that in this show.
We're crossing the streams. Okay,
it's another franchise too.
Yeah. All right. So what I do now is while this is wet, I let the white you'll see. I let it do what it wants to do. I bring in some more color. I'm not making this cloud, I'm letting it happen.
That's a very Bob Ross way to put it, actually.
Yeah. And the water just carries it. I think you're probably picking up glare, but you'll see when this dries.
So how did you discover this technique?
Before I learned anything in gouache, I was a watercolor guy, and so you'd often, like for clouds or sky background, you wet the cold pressed cotton like completely, and then you drop the paint in and let it do what it does. And that's how you get kind of like those what I call the watercolor effect. I don't know what it's really called.
That's a pretty fair term to put it, though, because for folks who work in something that's like thicker, more pigment heavy, like acrylics or oils, you are basically telling it what to do. Whereas with a water-based medium, it kind of does what it wants to do on its own, doesn't it?
It can. And using that technique with something like gouache, it had a whole different effect but it's not really working with this right now.
That's because I'm watching, of course.
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure how much the camera's picking up too, because while it's wet, you're probably seeing glare that isn't actually white paint. Another thing I do while it's wet.
So you're just tapping the side of the brush to kind of flick around little dots all over the place to make stars.
Yes. So I do it while it's wet, and I'll do that again. So you get it to spread out, so it looks like kind of distant stars in a gaseous, like a nebula environment. And then when it gets more solid or dry, I'll put it in, and then you'll have more solid stars and they'll look more like foreground.
You mean you're not just sitting there like Drew Friedman stippling for hours on end?
This is a good enough example. I'll let this dry, so you can actually see it. But in the meantime, I'm going to add more color. I put the white in first as a kind of base, and then I start putting color.
So, looking at your art as a whole again, we talked about the evolution of your style over time, and I'm kind of now thinking of evolution of mediums. And this kind of reminds you of, I watched Neil Adams before he passed away do a lecture, and he's talking about like why he won't do digital and why he will always do original works like this with physical medium, because it's also a thing he could resell, like we just mentioned, on Whatnot, or you could sell your sketches, that kind of thing. Do you see yourself ever transitioning into digital to kind of like save you time, or is this going to always be the way you prefer to work?
The temptation is definitely there. However, I'm not sure if I could get by without having originals to sell. Honestly, it is a big help. Because the page rate as it stands on its own is about minimum wage, or less. I work a lot of hours, so it's more than minimum wage. It's not like I'm a 40-hour-a-week McDonald's worker, but it's like I'm a 100-hour-a-week McDonald's worker.
Right.
So without the, and because this is so time intensive is why it's minimum wage, not because the page rates are particularly low. It's just my style of art takes a little longer. But at the same time, if I'm cutting my time in half, then I'm making more money on that side. I'm not sure. I think money really, if I'm being honest, doesn't enter into it. I don't think I'd feel like I did anything if I didn't have an original.
Right.
If I did a solid piece of art to bring, and why would I even go to conventions? That's what I kind of do, is I just bring my art. I mean, I sell books, I sell prints, I sign books. I'm there for a bunch of different reasons, but really it's to bring a gallery in a book. I bring these big giant portfolios, put them out on my table, and people flip through them so they can see what the original cover looks like. In fact, I'll show you that in a second. And while this is drying, I'll move this to the side and show you my book, which won't even fit on this desk. But I'll show you some originals, and then I'll bring the nebula back when it's dry and show you how I do the rest of it.
So this is honestly one of my favorite things about going to conventions, and I recommend for folks who have gone to Comic-Con to really make sure you head over to Artist Alley so that you can actually see the originals of people like JK, because it's one thing to see it printed, but it's another thing to like really see it in front of your face and just take in like all the details that kind of get lost in printing.
So yeah, here's some of the covers. This is a next gen cover. You can see what I mean about those. I talk about those, the monotony, the detail, these little dark lines and the little light lines on the side of those squares. Makes me nuts. That's the annual cover. Doesn't even fit on screen. So the originals, as you probably can tell, are much bigger. They're on 18 by 24.
So generally, you're working about double the size of the printed page?
About 4 times the size.
4 times. Okay, 4 times. So
But,
how do you get your stuff over to IDW then? Do you have a scanner that's big enough for this, or are you scanning in batches, or you just mail them the originals?
I have a flatbed scanner that does 18 by 12, and I have to scan it in 2 pieces and put it together.
Wow. Okay, that's a little bit of extra work right there.
Yeah, but it's better than, like, I used to have just an office scanner that was 9 by 12, so I'd have to do it in 4 pieces, and yeah, you don't want to do that.
No.
Okay. Get back to my nebula. I'm just, like I said, even if it's dry, it reactivates. So I'm just kind of blending in the white with it. But that's not the effect I'm going to show you. Much like the stars that I did, here's a little trick I use for even a finer toothbrush. So I can put like finer stars in there, but I can also kind of airbrush the star.
Oh, nice.
So you get a cluster there. When that dries, I'm gonna tighten that up, but I use this a lot. And if it depends on how much water you add and how much paint, but it's also another way besides tapping the brush to get more stars.
So how watery do you have your paint when you typically do like the flicking method here? Do you have it super watery, or is this just kind of like straight out the tube?
No, I add water. What I do is I mix on a separate palette for this. I add more water for the larger and less, not just less, but if I want a finer mist, what I'll do is I'll just, on a separate piece of paper, usually, I'll get most of it off, and then you get a finer mist. So you can use it kind of like as, to make the stars, or you can use it like as an airbrush, as I did there, or kind of an airbrush, not really. But it's a good substitute if you don't have an airbrush. You can see how it's kind of taken shape. You can see the nebula, you can see the star. And what you do is if you put something in the foreground on top of it, like I can do an asteroid when this dries, you get a pretty good spacescape, you know, and it all it is a big paint blob mess.
I mean, that's kind of art in a nutshell, isn't it? Though a lot of times it's trompe l'oeil. It's fooling the eye.
Yeah, exactly. When this dries, what I did was I took the toothbrush with a solution of part water, part gouache, and kind of just rubbed my thumb on it, and it gives you like a spray, much like an airbrush for the star. And I'm just gonna core out the star with a little bit of white there. There you go. Now you can see. Well, if you're listening, you can't see it, but what happens is I put enough black down. With enough water, and then put white and a color over it. And what happens is it kind of spreads out in a random pattern that looks more like a cloud or a nebula than I could have done intentionally. So the water kind of does work. So we were talking about shortcuts. This is a big one for me, and it comes in really handy in Star Trek books. Now, what I'm going to do now is, this is still a background. Now, if this was a cover and I had the time, I would paint the Enterprise over it. We're not going to do that here, but I will put some floating asteroids in there, you know, so it looks more Marvel cosmic. And what I do is I load up the brush with black. I know, space is black. Why am I doing that? Well, because I'm going to cover up some of these stars, and that's going to kind of give you the impression of the shape of the asteroid. And I'm just going to make a random pattern. The more random, the better, because it's a chunk of rock. And I'm just going to put that in right there. And what happens is you have enough water, and what it does is it leaves some blank area that kind of pushes the paint to the side, and that gives the illusion of texture. And all I did was just take a paintbrush full of paint and blob it down. I'm going to put a few more in here, and then I'm going to do highlights, and you'll see how just a simple line can make the big difference. So right now these are black blotches over black, but you can see them because it blocks out the stars we just put down. Now you're going to load up some white.
we talking cadmium white? We talking ivory white? Which white we using here?
Titanium, baby. Spare no expense.
Titanium. Titanium in the house.
I'm catching a little yellow on that, but do you want the white as a base because it's got a cover? Putting a little yellow and red as just a little splash of color. And what that's going to do is mix with the black and get us a brown. I'm going to have to turn the light on again, so I hope it doesn't glare it too much.
This one's much drier, so folks who are watching can definitely see, now how much water there was that was reflecting earlier.
Now, for those listening that want to go see this, where do they go? Let's plug your YouTube.
Well, they got to go to youtube.com/@TrekUntold, and I think they definitely want to swap over at the very least just to see this demo here because it's absolutely worth it.
You see how just these little lines, you just decide where your light source is coming from and then just cover that side. And don't be afraid to leave a lack of detail on the rest of it because in space, everything's in shadow.
Now, at this point, too, how wet is your brush when you're doing this part of it? Because I know you've been using the wetness of the brush to kind of like move things around, but now that you're trying to put these defining details in there, are you back to a dry brush or are we still wet here?
Yep, much more paint than water. So yeah, fairly dry. Because you want to cover, and it's really just a solid line on the side of the blob you've just made. And it'll give it on just one side, and it'll give it it'll give it the highlight that'll give it the kind of three-dimensional look.
It's kind of surprising like how quickly this is taking shape. This really is some Bob Ross stuff right now. I feel like it's like here's this random mishmash of black, and now it's suddenly an asteroid in space, and there's the Enterprise flying around.
Yeah. This is definitely a lot less intent to this because there's no wrong answer. That's why, Bob Ross does that, painting nature, because really there is a lot of random in space as well as in nature here, like whether it be leaves on a tree or floating rocks in space. There really isn't it's not like a likeness. It's not like somebody's face where it has to be, there's a right and a wrong.
I feel like watching you do this might be like how you take your breaks while you're working and like not having to think as much because you know how to do this. You can kind of have fun with this as opposed to a likeness where you got to like really hyper fixate on how someone's nose and eyebrow looks and that sort of thing. Like, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, sometimes like if I start feeling a headache coming on, I'll switch to something like this. And I'll actually save backgrounds on certain things for, I'm kind of on a roll right now, but I'll save that for when I'm tired. And then I'll get that done. Like I call it end of the day work when I've been at it for over 12 hours and I need something a little easier.
Now, at what point do you break out the Bob Ross palette knife and fan brush?
Only when I work in oils, not for gouache.
I'm just waiting for a happy little tree to sprout up in this asteroid field.
It is the same. It is the same idea, though. It's the same as using that fan brush to make pine trees. Just putting these little highlights on these black blotches, and suddenly, your brain fills in the rest. But it really is, as you can see, just line work on the edge of something that I just put down with a larger brush.
That's also, I think, an important part of how your work comes together too. And really, this is like for photorealistic in general, photorealistic painting. You can see this with like the Hildebrandt brothers, Alex Ross, not as much, I feel like, but when you're doing like these super duper heavily detailed things, you kind of have to have things in the background that are not quite as detailed. Otherwise, it's just going to be too much at once, right?
Yeah. And I was kind of talking about that when I was doing the background on the commission. You want the backgrounds to be as simple as possible, especially if it's not a feature of the story in that particular panel. When you're doing sequential work, you want to keep it as simple as possible to not take away from the what's happening in the foreground. And like a lot of times things will get lost if you overdo a background. And from a design perspective, nobody likes to look at busy. It'll just look bad. But there we go. That gives you the idea. But basically, you don't have to have that much skill to do a spacescape. I just showed you something you could do it. If you've never painted before, you could probably learn this in like in a day. It really is just water, paint, spreading out, splatter, and then blotching. That's
But
really,
JK, you made it look easy, but let's keep in mind, this is years of practice. And that is the value of an artist, of an actual artist doing this kind of stuff. Because this, for you, I'm sure, was many, many, many months and years of time to actually decipher how to do this in 20 minutes or less. So I think that's kind of an amazing thing to just witness here.
Well, you asked if I had any shortcuts. This is one of them. I'm not going to tell you all my secrets.
That's for the next episode of the podcast, folks. We'll get him out of him somehow.
Yeah. Got to leave someplace for me to go.
All right, well, JK, thank you so much for showing us this nebula. This is really awesome. Everybody here can see in the video version what the final version looks like. And man, you made it look so easy. It's really as Bob Ross in space. That's really awesome here. So I guess let's jump back over to the interview, though, and let's keep talking Trek.
Alrighty.
So I got to ask this question as a fan, especially. We're doing this interview right now, early September. It's been a while since we've seen a TNG Mirrorverse comic come out. Is there more planned? Are there more in the way? What's going on with the future of the Mirrorverse Saga?
I actually don't know the answer to that right now. Like I said, I didn't work on the last one outside of the covers. So I know we had planned with the Tiptons, we had planned a sequel. This was going to be a 2-part. I don't know if that was squashed. There's a lot of new and exciting things happening in Star Trek right now.
Yeah.
And it seems like a pretty full plate. So I would imagine nothing in the near future. If there is something going on, that they're keeping it secret from me. But just with all the miniseries we have at the moment and the ongoing, I highly doubt that there's going to be anything Mirror Universe this year. Maybe late 2025 or 24 rather. But I doubt there's anything right now. I haven't heard it.
So we don't really know what's happening next with the Mirrorverse, whether it's going to be in your hands or someone else's. And I know you've been doing other Star Trek stuff as well. But I'm curious, for you as the fan now, what is a Star Trek story in your head that you'd like to maybe not only illustrate, but also write?
Okay, we've the Tiptons and I have pitched this. I'm going to mention it because I think at this point it's probably never going to happen because we've been pitching it for like almost 10 years now. We wanted to do our own Star Trek What If title called Tapestries, based on the episode Tapestry, where Q would be the Watcher. And he would come in and narrate the story. And we would take actual episodes of Next Generation and say, but what if this happened instead? And then we could kill any character we wanted, or we could do anything because anything goes. It's a parallel universe. I thought that would be a lot of fun to kind of revisit episodes. And another one I wanted to do was a follow-up. I wanted to do like a mini series about pick like 4 episodes and follow up. There are some things that are left open. Like, what happened to that guy with that Betazoid and Tin Man? What adventures are they up to? I want to know. So I would love to have done a follow-up story on episodes. And the other thing I wanted to do was a TNG, the animated series comic book, a comic book based on the animated series that happened in another universe. So the idea was this. We just play along like this actually happened. And this is the comic adaptation of that animated series. Because after they canceled TNG, again, in an alternate universe, they never made movies. They waited a couple of years and went to the animated series like they did with the original series. And what would that look like? And so I wanted to work with, I even had artist Bobby Timoney, who just did like the Super Pets adaptation for DC. He was going to be, he came up with the character designs for what these characters would look like as animated characters. And I was going to just do the layouts and painted backgrounds, and he was going to take on that. And we even got Dayton Ward excited about it. And so we put a whole pitch together. And again, it's just something that we've been pitching for a while that probably isn't going to happen. So I feel totally comfortable talking about it. These 3, and there's plenty more. Believe me, all I do is think up this stuff. Go, oh, that would be good. But like I was saying, Star Trek at IDW, the plate is always so full.
Yeah, it is.
That if they do get to it, like once you have a pitch, they may get to it like 5 years later. Because we're always like 3 years ahead of once this is done, then we got this, then we got this, and then we got that kind of thing.
To me, it just sounds like these are all great ideas, but like Star Trek What If, that just sounds like the most amazing idea out there. I don't understand how they couldn't say yes to that. Like, I would just go on a rant right now, like IDW, what the fuck? Make this happen.
And we got the perfect name for it. We'll call it Tapestries, because that episode Tapestry where Picard, yeah. I mean, and
who wouldn't want to
we
read
got
that?
the
Like, I want to
perfect
read
narrator
that.
in Q. We just do John Delancey's voice, literary voice, like we write in the Q dialogue. I mean, it would be perfect. And it would be funny because, let's face it, Q narrating.
Oh man, that is too
We
good of an
could
idea.
break the fourth wall. You could look right at the camera because it's Q. There's so much you could do. I mean,
so we're gonna start a letter writing campaign, starting with this episode, to
there you go.
make this happen. Because come on, IDW, that's too good of a gold mine not to do something with. Oh my god.
And the great thing is, you could get different artists on it.
Totally.
You could do like 5 issues at once because you could have a different artist every time because it's kind of an anthology idea.
Like, what if Strange New Worlds crew didn't figure out how to stop subspace rhapsody from happening to everybody in the universe? It writes itself.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has that kind of what if mentality when they rewatch a show enough times. And let's face it, as Star Trek fans, we've seen every episode a million times. And every time we watch it, oh, what if that happened? We all do it. It's perfect. And like I said, Q, we got a built-in watcher right there.
So, JK, let's just kind of wrap things up here a little bit and bring it back to my listeners, because they're listening here. They're probably trying to get some pro tips on how to succeed and maybe go far in this industry. If they're not just listening to hear your awesome stories, but for somebody out there who wants to get into the field of what you're doing, what's your advice for them to go from a fan with a dream into someone that's working as a profession in this industry?
I would say pursue every avenue and stay tenacious. Do not be discouraged. If you think you got what it takes, you're either going to find out you don't, or you're going to get a job. So, I mean, either way, you got to keep moving forward. Take criticism in the spirit it was intended. It will help you. And then come back to that same person. In other words, if you have a portfolio review and they say, this is a little weak, it's going to hurt. I ain't going to lie to you. It's going to hurt, but just smile, say thank you, walk away, take it seriously, make those changes, practice, go back to that person. 9 times out of 10, they will remember you if you mention that you were there before. And I would say don't be afraid to publish, self-publish. Now with, when I was doing it, we actually put out books because this was late 90s. But I actually got picked up because I had put out a book, Digital Webbing Presents number 16, a 12-issue, it was an anthology book, a 12-issue story in there called Crazy Mary. And that's what ended up getting me the work, because I made sure once that book came out, I had it on every editor's desk. And one of them actually responded, and that's how I got my first job. That's a good method. Now you can do that online, and you can much easier promote.
So for artists, really, the biggest introduction is not just your own personality, but it's also your artwork and it's your portfolio. So for someone who is as well-versed in this as you are, what should be in someone's portfolio and what tools should they be presenting to somebody who they're trying to get a job with?
One of the most important things and one of the most common mistakes people make is dynamic splash pages and covers. If you're looking to get sequential work in comics, show some sequential work. And you're going to want to show at least 3 pages of a story. If they can see what's happening and understand what's happening in those 3 pages without words, then they know you can tell a story visually. That's what they're looking for. The other thing they're looking for, and this is where self-publishing helps, if you can publish something, it tells them you can finish a project and get it done on time. That's something they'll never get from a portfolio review. That's something you want to stress. That's something you want to show them, because that's a big concern. A lot of people have started and not finished a project, and then that ends their career right there. So if you have something you're working on, a passion project, finish it and let them know. Either publish it online or publish it however you want to publish it, but make sure they know about it.
So JK, what are you working on right now that you can tell us about without IDW sending the Hunters of Tosk after you and doing whatever they're going to do to you?
I'm actually not doing any Star Trek work until spring, because right now I'm working with Keith DeCandido, who's a well-known Star Trek writer and its own stuff, on a separate project. So we got 2 Star Trek people working on something. Apart from that, I can't tell you. Of
course not.
I can tell you that I started in October and I'll be finished around April. And and then I'll be back on Star Trek. But it is going to take all my time for about 6 months or so.
All right, we will have to wait and see what happens next. How can my audience keep up to date with what you're working on next?
Well, best way to do that, and I should mention while I'm working on that project, I may still be doing Star Trek covers, so that'll never end.
Okay, good. That's what matters.
But you can find me on Instagram, Blue Skies, Mastodon, Twitter, all the Twitters, and Facebook. I'm JK_Woodward on all of them except Facebook. I'm the Art of JK Woodward. You can find the page there. What I often will do demos and stuff on Instagram and across the platforms, and do that kind of time lapse photography thing. So anything I'm working on that I'm allowed to show, usually commissions, you can see it online, and that's where I make my announcements, and that's where I make my announcements about commissions if I'm taking commissions. If you want to get on the list.
All right, so JK, last thing for today, what's the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
Well, having the inside track on what's coming up is kind of fun.
That's pretty sweet.
And it's just, as an artist, it's fun to paint what you love. And I don't think I love anything more than Star Trek.
So JK, thank you so much today for talking us through your artwork, talking to us about your Star Trek fandom, and also especially for that demo that you showed us here. So we're going to have links in the show notes for all the different ways you can follow JK and support him and check out all his cool stuff, as well as a few links where you can buy some of his work on Amazon. So again, JK, I'm so grateful I got to spend this time with you today because I'm a longtime admirer of your work. This is just like for real, really, really cool. I mean, it was awesome getting to meet you in person. It's even cooler now to spend this quality time with you and just really dig into what you do. So thank you so much. And thank you for all your hard work on the Star Trek franchise.
Thanks for having me. I had fun.
That's it for this week's show. Thanks again for checking out Trek Untold. If you aren't already, please follow Trek Untold on social media, where you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, among others, all at Trek Untold. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube for the video versions of this show at youtube.com/@TrekUntold, and subscribe to us on whatever platform you're listening to the audio version on. We always appreciate likes, shares, comments, thumbs up, ratings, and reviews, and whatever you can do to help spread the word about this podcast and inform other Trekkies about why they need to check this show out. If you're able to financially support this show, visit patreon.com/TrekUntold to learn about the different ways you can contribute to keeping this show going full speed ahead. Until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the RageWorks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.